Are you certain you understand the people in your life? You trust your ability to spot a poisonous individual, to sense an oppressive presence, to recognize when a behavior violates your boundaries. But consider this. What if the greatest threats are masterfully concealed? What if the most damaging individuals are often the most charismatic, the kindest, even those within your own family? And while you guard against the blatant antagonists, you leave the gates to your psyche unguarded, admitting something far more perilous, the subconscious of another person encroaching upon your own. Carl Gustav Jung devoted his existence to exploring these hidden dynamics. In his work, The Ego and the Unconscious, he uncovers that the majority of what directs us operates beyond our conscious command. This isn't just true for you. It's true for everyone. And herein lies the peril. Because when an individual is oblivious to their own inner darkness, that shadow searches for a vessel. And frequently, that vessel is you. Perhaps this is a thought you've never truly considered, but consider it now. How many times have you felt emotionally depleted after a conversation with someone? How often have you been assigned blame for an act you didn't commit, or cast as the hero in a drama that was never yours? Jung identified this as projection, an unconscious process where another person projects onto you what they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. From that point on, you are no longer a person, but a symbol, a reflection, a fabricated adversary, an idealized savior. And every one of these images shares one thing in common. None of them is the real you. Yet the most unsettling aspect is that you often fail to recognize you are even a player in this psychological game. You believe you are providing help, showing empathy, or acting with maturity. In reality, you are sinking into a psychological territory that is not your own, attempting to solve conflicts that do not belong to you, manipulated by forces you did not create but which now command you. And this is not limited to people with malicious intent. Jung clarified that the greatest perils arise not from the consciously corrupt, but from the unintegrated and unconscious. These are individuals living estranged from their own psyche, controlled by masks, traumas, complexes, and suppressed desires. They are not necessarily evil. They are, however, dangerous. And this danger is quiet. It doesn't force its way through the main entrance. It seeps in gradually, day by day, through minor remarks, veiled critiques, and meaningful silences, until you begin to question your own sanity. And once you lose touch with your own psychic reality, you become an extension of their shadow. Maybe you are experiencing this very thing right now. In a romantic relationship, a friendship, at work, or even with your own kin. And maybe you're blaming yourself, struggling to figure out what is wrong with you. The truth is, nothing is. But there is something profoundly wrong with how you're being used as a container for another's unconscious mind. In this video, we will reveal, one by one, the 6 types of people Jung would classify as emotionally hazardous, types who operate not from deliberate malice, but from internal compulsions they themselves fail to grasp. This is precisely why they are so destructive. We will draw on Jung's own words, concepts, and warnings, taken directly from his writings like Ion, The Ego and the Unconscious, and Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, to help you identify these profiles. But beyond that, we will open your eyes to the idea that maybe, just maybe, one or more of these profiles also exists within you. Are you prepared? Then take a breath and let's begin. But be forewarned. After this, you will never see others or yourself in the same music way again. Picture a life with someone who holds you accountable for all their emotions, who transforms your very presence into a trigger, making you feel liable for feelings you never ignited. Initially, they appear vulnerable, profound, and delicate. But with time, you discover you've been pulled into a psychological war zone that is not yours, and where you are already at a severe disadvantage. This is the unconscious manipulator. an individual unaware of their own wounds who projects them onto you as a method of psychic self-preservation. Jung said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate. And this fate often has a name, a face, and dines at your table." The unconscious manipulator is governed by repressed content, unintegrated traumas, and unprocessed emotional pieces. Rather than looking inward, they take aim at you, turning you into a canvas for their own internal turmoil. This person exists in a perpetual state of projection. According to Jung, projection is a natural function of the psyche, but when it goes unrecognized, it becomes calamitous. In his book, The Ego and the Unconscious, he explains that projection creates a form of psychic blindness, a prison where the other person is no longer seen for who they are, but is instead used as a symbol for what lies hidden within us. This is exactly the method of the unconscious manipulator. They do not truly see you. They see a disowned piece of themselves and react to it as if it were an external reality. These individuals often adopt the role of the victim. Everything that occurs is the fault of someone else, never their own. When they feel anger, it's because you incited it. When they are sorrowful, it's because you let them down. When they feel inadequate, it's because you behave as if you're superior. This distortion is so insidious that you begin to doubt yourself. Was I truly being insensitive? Did I misspeak? Am I the toxic one? And in this way, the manipulation happens without a single raised voice or a direct demand. It's entirely emotional, subconscious, and incredibly effective. Even worse, these people are often quite charming. They possess charisma, a deep sensitivity, and an air of emotional intensity. This sets a perfect trap, because you believe you can assist them, heal them, or understand them in a way no one else can. But in practice, you are sacrificing your own psychological well-being to rescue someone who refuses to look within themselves. And the deeper you try to go, the further you sink. Jung warns that these projection patterns are especially dangerous because they cast us in a symbolic part. Savior, villain, betrayer, father, mother, anything but our authentic selves. And to live within a symbolic relationship is to live in a fantasy. You are no longer perceived as a person and are instead treated as a distorted image of the other's unconscious mind. The only defense against an unconscious manipulator is to cultivate awareness. See the patterns. Sever the invisible ties that bind you to this person's emotional drama. And crucially, constantly question whether the feelings you experience are genuinely yours or have been implanted. Because the unconscious manipulator doesn't storm into your life. They slip in through the opening of your own empathy. And once you identify this pattern, the next step is to see how it can be disguised even more effectively with the mask of the persona, the person who not only projects but performs, living to appear as something they are not. In the next section, we will delve into the bearer of the persona and how they embody one of the greatest psychological threats identified by Jung. Because while the unconscious manipulator casts their conflicts onto you, the bearer of the persona can pull you into a world where even you forget your true identity. If this content resonates with you, click the subscribe button and join the channel. Thank you for your support. Not all psychological harm stems from overt actions. At times, it originates from what appears flawless, from the constant smile, from the perfect composure, from the impeccable image. We exist in a culture of facades, where appearing to be holds more weight than actually being. And for Jung, this posed a significant danger, because when a person becomes overly identified with their persona, the social mask we all wear to navigate the world, they risk severing all ties to their true self. And those who live for the mask not only lose themselves, but also begin to warp everyone around them. In his book, The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung defines the persona as what someone is not, but what both he and others believe him to be. It is, in essence, an artificial identity shaped by the expectations of society, family, and profession. On its own, the persona isn't harmful. We all employ it. It helps us perform our social functions as a doctor, a parent, a neighbor, a colleague. The danger arises when someone starts to believe that is all they are. When the mask becomes fused to the face, everything spontaneous, vulnerable, and real gets locked away in the psyche's cellar. The bearer of the persona is a master of functional shallowness. They say what is expected. They act in the appropriate manner. They evade conflict at any price. But behind this carefully managed performance, a soul lies in ruins. Because the more they uphold the image, the more they strangle the self. And this repression will, eventually, demand payment. For anyone coexisting with this type of person, the effect is profound. You sense that something is off, but you can't articulate what it is. There's a deficit of spontaneity, of honesty, of connection in your interactions. Everything feels scripted. Worse yet, the bearer of the persona projects this same demand for perfection onto you. They want you to play your part, to conform, to participate in the act. If you express anything that deviates from the script, a raw emotion, a moment of uncertainty, a genuine pain, they recoil, grow anxious, and withdraw, because anything that reminds them of what they've suppressed becomes intolerable. Jung cautioned that this kind of identification with the persona is a primary obstacle to the process of individuation, the journey of self-discovery, and the integration of the unconscious. For him, the real hazard emerges when the individual is mesmerized by the role they inhabit, believing they are nothing more than what others perceive. And that is precisely the risk. When someone's existence is dedicated solely to gaining acceptance, recognition, and praise, they become a prisoner of their own facade, and everything authentic withers away, suffocated behind the polished exterior. Living with such a person can make you second-guess your own spontaneity. You start to monitor yourself, to weigh your words, to conceal the parts of you that don't fit into the idealized story. Before long, you find yourself wearing a mask as well without even realizing it. Coexisting with a bearer of the persona isn't just artificial, it's infectious. But something even darker lies beneath. Because when someone represses what they feel, think, and want for too long, it doesn't just go away. It builds up. It stews in the unconscious until it mutates into the shadow. And now we venture into an even more hazardous domain, one of denied emotions that resurface with explosive power. In the next section, we will explore the figure of the owner of the repressed shadow, the one who refuses to acknowledge their own dark side until it erupts. There exists a kind of individual who lives a life of control, polish, and restraint, always correct, always measured, always courteous. But beneath this facade of equilibrium, a powerful force is poised to erupt, because everything they deem wrong, unattractive, or unacceptable is simply shoved down into the basement of their soul. It is not conquered nor transformed. It is merely repressed. This is the core of the owner of the repressed shadow, someone who strives to be pure light until their darkness seizes command. Carl Jung devoted a significant portion of his research to comprehending the shadow. In Ion, he writes, "The shadow is everything that the individual refuses to recognize in themselves and yet insists on manifesting in some way. We are not discussing something external. The shadow is not the world's evil. It is not the other person. It is not the enemy. The shadow is internal. It is the fury you refuse to acknowledge. It is the envy you justify. It is the sexuality you censor. It is the ambition you cloak in false humility. Everything you deny in yourself does not vanish. It becomes the shadow. And as Jung taught, what you do not bring into consciousness will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The owner of the repressed shadow may not seem dangerous at first. In fact, they are often admired, disciplined, gracious, and helpful. But there is an unsettling quality. They cannot stand weakness in others. They have adverse reactions to spontaneity. They are disturbed by strong emotions. They always seem to be under pressure but never break, until they do. And when that happens, the result is catastrophic. This person exists in a state of constant emotional surveillance. They forbid themselves from feeling, and so they judge those who do. They forbid themselves from making mistakes, and so they lash out at those who do. They become moralistic, judgmental, and domineering. But all of this is merely an effort to keep the unconscious in check. Jung was adamant. The stronger the persona, the more suppressed the shadow. And the more suppressed the shadow, the more savage its eventual expression will be. You can spot this pattern in people who have outsized reactions, who erupt over minor issues, who nurse grievances for years, who undermine relationships through passive aggression. They are the notoriously difficult people whose bitterness, resentment, and criticism seem to have no source. The source is the shadow, unintegrated, unacknowledged, and unaccepted, and this is the critical point. The shadow is not composed solely of negative traits. Jung made it clear that it also holds your unrealized potential, your stifled creativity, your hidden power. But when the shadow is denied, all of this curdles into poison, and this poison seeps into the relationship, the environment, and especially into those who are closest. Living with the owner of the repressed shadow is like living beside an emotional minefield. You never know what will trigger an explosion until you are in its blast radius. But this repression doesn't come from nothing. It is often fueled by an illusion of superiority, by a rigid moral code that weaponizes guilt as a form of control. This leads us to our next type, the moral controller. Someone who not only suppresses their own desires, but also makes you feel guilty for expressing yours. In the next part, we will expose this type, which Jung considered one of the greatest barriers to psychological freedom. The self-appointed guardian of virtue who secretly hides their own demons. Not all tormentors wield a blade. Some employ crosses, regulations, doctrines, and ready-made phrases. They are the ones who profess to be guided by ethics, justice, and high principles. But in reality, they are imprisoning themselves and others in a cage constructed of guilt and shame. Jung was intimately familiar with this archetype. He believed that when morality is used as a cover, it becomes one of the most treacherous forms of psychic suppression. This describes the moral controller, an individual who, rather than integrating their shadow, projects it onto the conduct of others, condemning them for what they cannot accept in themselves. You have surely encountered such a person. They are quick to point fingers outward, but never look inward. They present themselves as a model of behavior, not out of genuine virtue, but because they have a desperate need to uphold an image of moral supremacy. According to Jung, the greater the repression, the more powerful the urge to project the shadow. And this is precisely what the moral controller does. They cast others as sinners, deviants, and reprobates to evade confronting their own desires, impulses, and contradictions. The problem is that, unlike a typical emotional manipulator, the moral controller is convinced they are acting for the greater good. They genuinely believe they are correcting, saving, or educating the other person. This makes their influence even more poisonous, as it is disguised by authority, benevolent intentions, and a hollow spirituality. Their criticism is often delivered with phrases like, "I'm only telling you this for your own good," or "You'll thank me for this one day," or "Someone has to be honest with you." But this honesty is never objective. It is saturated with projection. In his book Ion, Jung extensively explores the figures of Christ and the Antichrist as archetypes of wholeness and fragmentation. The moral controller thinks they are embodying the light while remaining completely ignorant of their own darkness. They project evil onto those around them to preserve the illusion of their own inner purity. This renders them blind, dangerous, and incapable of perceiving the complexities of the human spirit. If you are close to someone like this, you might begin to feel perpetually guilty, as if you are fundamentally flawed. Even when you are simply being yourself, you feel scrutinized, judged, and diminished. And the most twisted part is that you often internalize their judgment. You start to suppress parts of yourself that are natural, human, and spontaneous, trying to conform to an ideal that was never yours. The other's morality becomes your prison. This dynamic is frequent in families, religious groups, and in flexible systems where compliance is mistaken for virtue. Jung identified this pattern as a grave danger to the process of individuation. Because where excessive moralism exists, self-knowledge is absent. The extreme moralist doesn't seek truth, they seek control. And when they fail to control the outer world, they resort to controlling the inner world of those around them. But the moral controller is not the only one driven by unconscious powers. There is another type, one that is even more volatile, unstable, and erratic, the complexed individual. While the moralist represses and projects, the complexed person is entirely possessed by unconscious content, reacting like an emotional marionette. In the next part, we will venture into this explosive domain where consciousness yields control and traumas take the driver's seat of the psyche. Prepare to meet the person who can cherish you today and devastate you tomorrow, without ever understanding why. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment. Envision coexisting with someone who is tender, loving, and generous one moment, only to erupt in rage, withdraw into a stony silence, or accuse you of something that never crossed your mind the next. A compliment becomes a demand, a joke becomes an attack, a gesture of affection is interpreted as a threat. No matter what you do, it seems you are constantly navigating unstable terrain. This is the reality for those who live with a person governed by unconscious complexes. For Jung, complexes are autonomous nuclei of emotion and memory that exist in the unconscious and can hijack consciousness at any moment. They are like fragmented personalities within us, created by traumas, psychic injuries, and unresolved experiences. In his book Psychological Types and also in The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung outlines how these complexes can directly influence an individual's behavior, causing them to react not to the present moment, but to the reverberations of the past. A simple remark unconsciously connects to a past abandonment, rejection, or humiliation, and those in their vicinity bear the consequences. The complexed individual is unaware that they are being directed by these internal forces. When they react with fury, profound sadness, or intense resentment, they believe their response is rational. But it is not. They are re-experiencing undigested emotions. And the difficulty is that this doesn't happen all the time. It occurs in bursts. There are emotional eruptions followed by periods of clarity, affection, or remorse. This makes the relationship with such a person all the more confusing and addictive. You start to tell yourself, they're not always like this. Sometimes they are wonderful. And that is precisely what keeps you ensnared, because there are moments of true connection and genuine love. But these moments are inevitably followed by unpredictable fractures, where you find yourself caught in an emotional hurricane you cannot comprehend. And in an effort to bring back the calm, you bend, you adapt, you make yourself smaller. You start to steer clear of certain subjects, to filter your words, to walk on eggshells, all to avoid waking the beast that slumbers within the other person. But here is the stark reality. That beast is not awakened by you. It is always present, dormant, hungry, awaiting any pretext to surface. And when it does, it devours everything in its path. For Jung, unrecognized complexes ultimately colonize the psyche. They speak for you, feel for you, and act for you. And in the case of the complexed person, this takeover is a frequent event. They might be controlled by a complex of inferiority, martyrdom, abandonment, or persecution, each with its own stories, emotions, and requirements. And the more you try to preserve the peace, the more you perpetuate the fantasy that it's possible to manage the unmanageable. To be near someone like this is to live in a state of constant high alert. There is no emotional consistency. The present is perpetually haunted by the ghosts of the past. And inevitably, you begin to absorb these ghosts yourself. You start to second-guess your own perception, your memory, your feelings. And without knowing it, you too are being colonized by the other's unconscious. But the most perilous part is still to come. Because while the complex person swings between emotional poles, there is another type of person who doesn't shout, doesn't explode, doesn't accuse, but who will consume your energy until you are left with nothing. In the next and final section, we will discuss the psychic vampire, the one who feeds on your time, your focus, your empathy, and leaves you utterly exhausted, depleted, and empty. And with them, we will conclude this cycle by revealing what Jung truly saw as the escape from this unconscious wilderness. Some people do not desire your company, they desire your energy, and they will do whatever it takes to drain it from you, not with force, nor with open hostility, but with subtle demands, chronic helplessness, and an emotional dependency masked as affection. This is the psychic vampire, the most silent and treacherous form of emotional depletion that Carl Jung warned against, even if he didn't use that specific term. Because in the language of Jung, this represents the unresolved symbiotic relationship, the pathological connection that stunts psychic growth and dissolves the boundaries of the self. In various writings, Jung shows us that one of the gravest threats to the process of individuation, the path to wholeness, is the symbiotic bond where two people fail to see themselves as distinct individuals, but rather as psychic extensions of each other. The psychic vampire thrives in exactly this kind of connection. They require your constant focus, your daily reassurance, your perpetual availability. But beneath this profound neediness lies an emptiness that is not yours to fix and that you can never hope to fill. It begins with you offering support. Then you offer your time. Then you endure emotional mistreatment in the name of compassion until you realize that all your vitality is being siphoned away, and you no longer know where they end and you begin. The exhaustion is all-consuming. It is not merely physical, it is existential. It feels as if your very soul is being consumed, drop by drop, day after day. Jung wrote of people who, unable to support themselves psychologically, attach to others like emotional parasites. And as harsh as that sounds, it is the truth. The psychic vampire does not wish to grow. They wish to be carried. But the danger lies not only in the exhaustion, but in the erosion of the self. You start to feel guilty for needing your own space, selfish for desiring quiet, heartless for wanting distance. Because the psychic vampire is an expert at flipping the script, the victim becomes the accuser, the needy one becomes the manipulator. And before you know it, you are living your life to prevent crises, to keep the peace, to maintain a connection that is silently killing you. Jung presents us with a way forward, to make the unconscious conscious. And this applies equally to others and to ourselves. Because it's possible that at some point in your life, you have also been a psychic vampire, or a complexed person, or a bearer of the persona. None of us is exempt. We all have a shadow. We all carry pain. The distinction is between those who have the courage to look inward and those who choose to project that burden onto others. This video was meant to be a reflection, a deep look into the dynamics that entrap us, wound us, and keep us unconscious. If you are still here, it means you are ready to see, to name, and to break free. And that is the first and most potent form of liberation. It's not about assigning blame, but about stepping out of the role of the hostage, about reclaiming authority over your own psyche. Now, I invite you to participate. Share in the comments which of these profiles you have encountered and which, in all honesty, you recognize within yourself. Your comment could be the spark of awareness for you and for others who read it. And before you leave, a crucial note. The next video is just as vital. It will guide you even further on this journey of self-knowledge. So, continue watching. You need to see this, because the more light we shine on the unconscious, the less power it has over us. I'll see you there.